Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Two Old Sexperts. This is Sean McGill, and I'm joined by my co host, Sharon Potter. Today, Sharon and I talk with you about basic sex education throughout the lifespan, and we address concerns as it relates to sometimes working backwards and supporting those with disabilities. Today, we're talking about sex education, but sex education pretty much throughout the lifespan and some recommendations that we might have for teaching young children into adulthood because you're never too old or even too young, from what I'm discovering, to learn about this stuff.
It's so interesting to me. I had an experience not so very long ago being in an office that did medical sort of procedures, and they had posters on the wall that should show body parts and description, typical medical posters. And one was the nervous system, and it was genetically, it was a male, anatomically a male. And they were describing the nervous system. So, but what they had done, and I kept looking at it thinking, what is that? They made like a little cutout of I don't, it looked like a diaper or some whatever, and put it over the genital area. And I mean, it just kind of made me laugh. But then I said, what's with that? And they said, well, someone was concerned a child might see it. And I said, and they said, well, it could be, shocking or traumatic. And I said, well, if they ask a question, you give an answer. What is that? Well, that's an adult man, that's a penis. And you're a little boy, you have a little one, or you're a girl, you don't have, I mean, whatever. But they actually covered it up in a medical office. I was like, oh my God, this isn't even Florida.
Well,
Um,
and that's sort of the weirdness of American culture too.
yeah.
We tend to sexualize so much. If you, I don't watch a lot of TV, but if you watch TV and watch commercials specifically,
Oh my goodness.
so many of the commercials, the media is so highly sexualized, which impacts body image. So it's
Absolutely.
out there in front of your face, but then we're a bunch of weirdos and wanting to talk about it very clearly and give accurate information and answering those questions for people.
Exactly. But if we, start with children in school, usually, or well, not even before school, but that's a parenting issue, and I don't know if we want to do that today. We can do that another day. But the information that you give kids, and some schools might be doing it, really well, and I think that's wonderful. My grandchildren that live in California had very different experiences than I know children are having here in Pennsylvania, and it depends on the individual school, but they usually give basic plumbing, just kind of the body parts. And and they're usually separate, male female classes. I think maybe today there are combined classes, and they just identify body parts. And then if they're females, if they're separate, well, even if they're together, if they're talking about a female, they talk about menstruation and breasts and general information, dating, peer pressure, that sort of stuff. And for males, they talk about body hair, erections, maybe nocturnal emissions. I don't know. And then again, peer pressure and dating. But and then they might talk about masturbation. I mean, and then oral and anal sex. I don't know. I can't. I don't know any schools who have talked about that. And of course, LGBTQ issues, which should be part of everything from the beginning. And it's so strange to me that it's so like don't talk about that. It's like it just doesn't make sense at all to me. What are you talking about? You're
Well,
talking
but we're
about
also, I mean, look at what's happening in American culture, excuse me, with not wanting to putting bans on books and putting bans on information. I've talked about this before. I didn't get any education when it comes to sexuality. And I don't even think I got sexuality information. It was more about the biology, the anatomy, and that was in high school. So
I didn't even get that. I mean, absolutely nothing. There was nothing. And I do remember, I guess I was 12 or 13 when I got my period, and I thought I was dying. I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea. But my grandmother lived with us, and she was, oh, honey, no, it's a good thing. You're a young woman now, I mean, but
you're
no
like, really?
explanation. Yeah, like, gee, thanks. I'm so happy about this. But I mean, a lot of kids in my generation, people didn't have none at all. And then your generation, maybe a little bit. And my kids, I didn't really, I don't, they had this kind of real basic stuff. But I do know that there are some places that are doing more involved education, and that's a really good thing.
So for your grandkids in California, which California is a more progressive state,
Yes.
about what
Mhm.
grade or about how old were they when they received some of this education?
Well, they probably, I'm not sure I can answer that correctly. They certainly were having very deep discussions in high school, but they may have gotten information earlier, just basic information about, periods and masturbation, I would think, because that's, comes on pretty early. And erections, I mean, kids get scared if they don't know what's happening and feels good, but like, you wake, the nocturnal emissions. I mean, I had adults telling that with disabilities saying that, they thought there was something wrong with their body because they were waking up and there was stuff there. And but it's just so incredible to me that what people don't know. But in high school, I mean, I think I may have told you this before, but many years ago, I asked my granddaughters, I was with three granddaughters, and they were like 13, 14, 15. And I asked them if they had any gay or transgender friends. And they just looked at me like, yeah, of course. Like it was like a dumb question. And that felt really good actually. But it's California. They also have Hispanic friends and Asian friends, and that's the way it is. And
Which makes
yeah,
it so
so
beautiful too, because it's the younger generation, your grandkids, my son, who are so open-minded and so loving and accepting of differences that it
yes.
makes me feel secure to know that's happening. And my son went to Catholic school, and I remember, we get all panicked over Catholicism or religion, but I will tell you that my experience has been that with Catholic people, one of my dearest friends is a Catholic nun. She's been more loving and accepting of me as a transgender person than a majority of the population. So
Wow.
for Jack, who went to Catholic school, I remember them saying we're going to be presenting information, and they did go over. This was eighth grade, aspects of sex and safe sex and aspects of the internet, and it was pretty good. And I would supplement the things that they weren't talking about, like masturbation. But by the time he was through eighth grade, he knew about pornography. He knew about masturbation. Um,
Yeah,
School provided the basics and I filled in the rest. I'm a firm
exactly.
believer that you have to be willing and able to have conversations with your kids over everything.
Yep.
That way they're comfortable to come and talk with you about things too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and pornography, of course, I mean, just all of it. As you said, this country uses sex to sell everything, promote everything. But, pornography, and for the people that we support with, intellectual disabilities or autism, pornography or television, the media, I mean, the things that they're seeing, it seems like they can't, they're all made up, and you want to tell them that it's not true. They're actors and what actresses, whatever. Sometimes it is true in this world that we're living in. Very bizarre things happen. Um, but it's the conversation. It's not just giving people, let them see something or let them read something, or we give them, let them listen to something and then leave. You spend, it has to be a conversation. It has to be a two-way street, no matter what the age of the person is or their ability to understand. You just have to have the conversation until they do. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah, and most of what we're talking about today, when we're talking about education, sex education through the lifespan, all research is pointing to this education should be completed by the time a person graduates high school. So
Oh,
you're
goodness.
looking at by the age of 18, typically,
Yeah.
people should have received all education in these areas. And the work that we do, people, if they're receiving education, it's very, very minimal. So we're trying to provide the information and resources at any age.
Yeah, I read somewhere that, and I don't know what country it was, a Scandinavian country, I think, that in the last year of high school, there are classes that discuss what the first sexual encounter should be. What are the components of it? How to please your partner and yourself, and safe sex and the whole thing. I mean, it's what a lovely gift to give those kids as they're leaving because we don't. I mean, that's going a step beyond, but I thought it was absolutely wonderful when I heard that. So
And we're
powerful.
working with people, with a range of disabilities. When considering autism, what was formerly known as Asperger's, was just now autism now. I mean, there's a high probability that people are going to encounter sexual experiences. So they have to be prepared. Kids are younger and younger and younger having
Yeah.
sex too.
Yeah.
The onset of puberty is happening at a much earlier age. So we have to start talking about this stuff.
And when it comes to the folks that we work with intellectual disabilities and autism, it's just so interesting because they most often have less education around sexuality than typical folks. And in addition to that, the amount of abuse that people that we support experience is much higher, 7 times higher at least. So that factors into it too. What has their experience been with sex? I mean, they may be completely confused. I mean, when I think of child abuse, I mean, it's no matter how you think of it, that's terrible. It's wrong. It's immoral. All of that. If it continues over time, sex feels good. So kids who are involved in over time and they're not being hurt in a painful kind of way, emotionally they are, because they're children. There's such confusion because they don't understand, I liked that and I wanted to do that, but I shouldn't have done that. And, I mean, and if it was a male that they were involved with and they're a boy, they're struggling with, are they gay or not? And how would you know that? Because that's your only experience. And it's one that you don't understand because you're a child, like 5, 6, 7 years old.
That's so interesting because as you talk, things always pop into my head, and I always say that. This young man that I've known and worked with for so many years jumped into my head, and he was identified as an offender. He had offended against his younger brother many, many years ago. He was a juvenile also, but he had been sexually abused by a male for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him saying that he was gay and then he was bisexual. And I was talking, we kind of explored his trauma as a victim. And I said, to describe it a little more, and he said, listen, Sean, it was consenting. And I said to him,
Yeah.
it couldn't be consenting. Even though you may have physically enjoyed the feeling, you were a child and he was an adult. It
Yep.
was not consenting.
Absolutely.
And from that period on, he said, yeah, I don't think I'm gay and I don't think I'm bisexual. I think I'm straight.
Yeah. I mean, how would they know? It's just amazing. I just did an assessment on a young man that, I mean, he's fascinating. He was an absolute joy. I spent about 2 hours with him, but that's the first time that I met him. Went to a party and he and someone he knew, wasn't a stranger, it was another person his age, were caught, as they often are, in the bathroom. And they both agreed that it was consensual and they wanted to be boyfriends, whatever. And 2 days later, I guess the staff had been talking to him about it. And 2 days later, he said, I was abused. So they had pressed charges. I mean, it was a mess. But the truth is, he doesn't understand. He doesn't know what's consensual and what's not. He had so many sexual encounters with his father. His mother died. His father was molesting him. And when he was 6, his mother died when he was 6. He was put into foster care when he was 6, and he was in 2 or 3 foster cares within a year, and he was abused constantly through the whole system. How would he possibly know what is consensual and what's not? When some of it felt good, when some of it he initiated. I mean, it's just so traumatic. I mean, just even, well, and I know you feel the same way. We're here to be objective and to help, but when you hear these stories and you meet these people, it just grabs you and you just wish you could, I don't know, have a magic wand or something and fix it, but you can't.
We're
Yeah,
working backwards all the time. We're
exactly.
pulled in when there's an identified problem or big issue, and then
Right.
we're having to not just work on that issue, but we're working backwards to try to resolve.
Exactly. I always think about that saying, you can't help them out, you have to help them through. And that means you're with them. You're emotionally with them through the whole thing, and just have to do a better job up front. Younger people, and good, honest, concrete information. Like I love your puppets, your video. I mean, I really do. I mean, that's really like I have these, I use these little clay figures that are ridiculous, but I have two male and two female, and they're anatomically correct. They're about as big as my hand, and I can demonstrate things. And I use the Cookie Sutra, which is fun, but it shows sexual positions. But your puppets can talk to each other and they can interact, and they're really quite wonderful.
Well, stay
Um,
tuned. I'm going to be creating a new video on masturbation and fetishes using
oh,
puppets.
oh goodness. Oh, that's great. I can't wait to see
Because
that.
let there be a plug in. The caveat is we cannot show people how to do these things. We should not see their private body parts, and nor should they see
Right.
anyone else's. So we have
Yes.
to get creative in our resources and how we present the information, because some people do need to learn through visuals too. So we have.
Yes. Yeah, they really do. And real conversations. I mean, I once was speaking at a conference and someone introduced me and said, now, and I was going to talk exactly about this. And the person that introduced me said to the audience, now, if Sharon says anything that makes you uncomfortable, it's okay to leave. And I said, thank you for that, Sue. But I would like to add, if anyone feels uncomfortable with what I'm saying, I would ask that you stay afterwards and talk to me, and whatever it is, we'll try to talk this through. I mean, that's the problem right there. If it's uncomfortable, just don't talk about it. Get away from it. And so many people don't want to go back into that dark past of being abused. They just don't want to go there. It's so horrible. But if they don't, then they're 50, 60-year-old adults acting like a 5-year-old having a temper tantrum because they're terrified. We have to do a better job. But when I'm meeting with adults, when I'm doing classes for adults with disabilities, which I love doing more than anything, I think, I just first talk about the differences in males and females. And I have line drawings and my little people, the body parts, but I want to know if they know the difference in male and female and adult and child, because that's one of the issues that is a problem. And then we identify body parts, including slang and proper words, which gets to be pretty funny and uncomfortable, certainly for staff. They don't want to be saying those words that I'm not comfortable with. Nobody does. But if someone that we're supporting uses those words, then yeah, that's one word. And another one is, does anybody have another name? Does anybody have another name? Well, you can have a pretty long list of names for body parts, but you want to, of course, give them the correct one and say, if ever you have an issue, this is the word that you should use. If you have to tell someone or a doctor or whatever it might be. And then what each body part does. The penis pees and it ejaculates. Well, what does that mean? Does anybody know another word for the white stuff that comes out? And then they'll go into all that. And that's just more and more information that you're gathering. And then it's used in sex. And I don't just say all these things. I say, does anybody know how? And so it's constantly a two-way conversation. So, people might be saying, yep, the man puts it in the lady, whatever. I mean, yep, anything else. And just go into the detail of what comes out of the group and not push them into things they're uncomfortable with, but cover all of it. And I do. And then with all of them, the clitoris and the vagina, and I mean, all the female parts and the breasts and the anus and the body hair, where it is and on males and where it is on females, and children don't have it until a certain age, but just all of that in a way that's fun. It should really actually be fun, so people are not like shaking in their seats and getting really upset. And that happens too. I've had people get upset during a training, and we take a little break or something. And I mean, I don't bring the attention onto the person, but I'll say, let's just go relax for 5 minutes or something. And I can get my way to that person and say, how are you doing? What are you, and just sort of help stabilize them. And if they tell me something that happened to them that's traumatic, I tell them that we'll meet afterwards and I'll help them through it. We'll meet with their staff and we'll get them some help. But I thank them for sharing that with me.
Sarah, do you find that you have to ask some questions to make sure that they understand things too? Because my experience, and I do this even myself, where someone will say, well, Sean, do you know about such and such or so and so? And I'll go, uh-huh. Meanwhile, I have no clue because I don't want to appear stupid.
Yeah, I do. I don't mean I do want to appear stupid, but I do understand what you mean. Yeah, well, one of the things that I mean, if I'm meeting with a smaller group and we're talking after we talk about the particular issue, I ask them to tell me what we just talked about. So you be the teacher now and tell me because I don't know. So yeah, because you can give somebody information and they don't quite get it. I mean, we've all received information, math, please, calculus, like I had that information in my head somewhere, but there's no way I want it to rise up again. I mean, it's not something I want to remember. So,
And sometimes we just assume based on how well a person does in other areas. I mean, I have a number of people, you would have no idea they have a disability based on the way they present, based on the way they carry themselves and talk. And this one guy, they were saying that he has some serious problematic sexual behaviors because of the way he talks. And he was using the term rape very loosely and saying he raped this person and raped three
um,
here. And I discovered that by asking a lot of questions, what he was talking about wasn't rape, it was flirting.
oh my goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, this is someone who, by the age of 12, was locked up in the juvenile justice system and didn't get out until I think he was 21. So you're talking long-term incarceration as a juvenile. He missed so many opportunities for education, growth, and development, but he really was street smart and he could carry himself very well.
Wow. Well, that reminds me of, I mean, one of the saddest things, but it ended up being okay. There was a man in his 40s who lived in his own apartment with his cat, and he had support from staff, and he had a part-time job. And a staff person said that he was trying to have sex with his cat, that he was into bestiality. They took the cat, and he was absolutely heartbroken. My friend explained that when he was meeting with this gentleman and going through what he understood about sex and what was happening with this cat, the information we, the professionals, gave this man like 15 years prior to this happening was that something comes out of a man's penis that makes babies. So he was trying to urinate on his cat so she'd have kittens. So, I mean, first of all, the whole scene, I can't even begin to imagine the trauma, but we did that. We, by not asking him to repeat back to us, what we just told him, got him into big trouble years later. And so it ended up being lovely. He got his cat back and they got him a kitten, and he was fine. But the trauma that he went through because of us, because we did not do a good job of giving him the information he needed. And I can't imagine how many situations there are like that. Hopefully fewer today, but and then many of the people that we support also need some kind of physical help. And so they're touched all the time. And if somebody has to be helped out of bed or helped with hygiene, it's not necessarily that the staff need to say, do I have your permission to help you out of bed? But it's like, okay, you're ready to get out of bed now? A question, something like, so that it's in their control. Because if we just go ahead and do things without asking people, anybody can. There are no boundaries. I think a lot of people just get into some trouble, get into some situations that they can't get out of because they got into them thinking that that's just what happens if you're that person. Anyway, I do think it's important. The whole touching thing is extremely important. One of the questions I love to ask, because it's actually can be funny, what is sex? Well, the response is just, oh, it's sometimes somebody will say doing it. And what I say is, yes, well, tell me more about that. What does that mean? And then somebody will say, the man gets on top. And I'll say, well, maybe, yeah. And tell me more. What then? He puts it inside. Puts what inside where? I mean, really ask and ask and ask and ask. And like every time you get deeper into it, people get a little more uncomfortable, but a little funnier. They get smiling and laughing because I want them to know every single thing that they need to know. So that's always interesting. And then it could be a male and a female. There could be a male and a male. There could be a female and a female, or there could be sex alone. And they'll look and I say, you know that there's sex alone. And sometimes they'll say no, and sometimes someone will kind of smile a little bit. And I say, it's called masturbation. And do you know what that is? And some people will say, jerking off or whatever terms they have. And I say, yes. And people get all awkward and uncomfortable when you start talking about that. And I said, one of the things that you need to know is it's normal and it's healthy and it's private. So in a room where you're alone, it could be your bathroom in your own home, but it's not a bathroom at McDonald's. It's a private thing that you're doing privately, and maybe eventually you talk about with a partner, but usually when we're talking about this, because most of the people that we support are not going to have a lifetime partner. And that is going to be their means of getting sexual gratification is masturbation. So it's normal. Then I ask them what an orgasm is, and they usually don't know that word. So I just call it a big happy feeling all over, and they know that. And then I do talk a bit about sex, the difference in sex and intimacy, because sex is the actual action, and intimacy is sort of the feeling that you get in your heart and in your body. And you could have someone that you love that you're not having sex with,
Exactly right. Yeah.
and you have an intimate relationship. And if for those few of us in our lives that have been lucky enough, you can have both at the same time. But they're two different things, and they can come together as one glorious thing. But I mean, if you have a very best friend that you just want to be with and hold their hand and go for walks with and cry or laugh with, that's an intimate relationship, and that's priceless. And then the other thing that I talk about, and it's the relationships, and I try to help people understand what is a casual friend, like the mailman or the checkout person at the supermarket, and what's a friend. You go to school with them, you work with them. What's a best friend? Somebody that you call them on the phone, you visit them at their homes, and you know each other's families and what have you. Then what's a boyfriend or girlfriend? And then that goes into what's a lover. And then I talk about, what do you know about them? Do you know they have siblings? Do they have parents? Do they live alone? Do they have jobs? Then what do you physically do with each of them? You might fist bump the mailman if you're close enough, or wave or nod or whatever. And then a friend, someone you work with, you say good morning and how you doing and whatever. And all the way up until you may have a sexual relationship with a partner.
And we may have to create more guidelines for people too, because my experience is that people with disabilities often, not always, have this overwhelming drive to be loved and to have
Yes.
this sense of belonging. So sometimes we have to break things down even more. I was at a meeting yesterday, a woman, she's in her 70s, showing signs of dementia, but she will talk to anyone, and she's at such risk because she's already starting to wander and that sort of thing, but she's so at high risk for victimization. And I said to her, do you know everybody's name? Like, so there was a stranger that she went up to in the store, and I said, so what is his name? Well, I don't know. And she can barely remember my name. And I said, listen,
Yeah.
unless you know their name, for sure know their name, you shouldn't be talking to them. And she said, okay, is it okay for me to say hi? Sure. I say hi to people all the time. If I'm in a store, I'll smile, nod my head, or might say hi. It's okay to say hi to people.
Yeah.
I remember my
Exactly.
mom saying, don't, when you're walking in the street, don't make eye contact. We're in New York City or something. And I'm one of those people, I make eye contact. One, because I want to be friendly, but two, I want to remember your face if something does happen.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, the touching thing. I was doing a education thing for an agency, and there were maybe 10 or 11 people there, and some of them came up to me after and said thank you. And this one young man, he was in his 20s, and I guess he said thank you. And I said, oh, well, thank you for being here. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and he just stood there and said, please don't touch me. And I felt, I mean, here I was touching him after I had just, but it was sort of out of context. We were there saying thank you and goodbye. And just, I mean, I didn't hug him, but I touched his shoulder, and he just said, please don't touch me. And so I apologized, and he said, that's okay. But good for him,
Good for him, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have to be okay. We have to shelve our egos and be okay with
Yeah.
that kind of feedback too.
Oh, it's so important for people to tell us what they want and don't want. And again, that's really difficult for staff. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. And there's a line, because if you're supporting someone that has some kind of risk, I mean, it could be a medical risk or, anything, you want to be really careful to have safety around them, but not boundaries that pain them. They're people. They need to make their own decisions, and we need to be able to go by what they want us to do and not to do.
If you can't honor what they really want to eat for dinner, you're not going to honor what they want in intimate relationships.
Oh boy, that's true. But then when you think that through, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean more work for staff? I mean, really, that's the reality of it all. Or it might also mean the flip side of that would be that you and the person that wants a particular thing for dinner could do that together. And wouldn't that be nice?
Exactly it. And that is
Yeah,
really the premise of positive approaches. It's
right.
not giving people whatever they want. It's about providing education and continuing to educate, but perfecting negotiation so that
Exactly.
it's workable and it meets people's needs.
The history of abuse to me is the one of the biggest issues. You can have painful, traumatic history. And what ends up, if you bury that and now you're an adult, there's a violence that can come out if someone says something to you or touches you in a certain way, that you just kind of explode because you're terrified. You're 5 years old inside your big adult body. And the other side is, if you've had pleasure, which we talked about just a little bit ago, if you have pleasure in those sexual encounters, like whatever went on for years, but it was pleasurable, you're completely confused. So, like, when there's a history of abuse, you can't just say, oh, they have a history of abuse, so be careful. But what happened? How is it impacting them? Like the person that I touched on the shoulder, what was that all about? I had a gentleman that I worked with that was assaulting staff. They said for no reason. Well, there was a reason. He'd been molested as a child by his stepfather and uncle, and they would take him by the shoulder into the bathroom. And anybody that touched his shoulder, he'd nail them. But no, it was right there in his record. But well, I asked him
But
more
that's where
details.
we have to drill down and work on those things. I have a
Yeah,
group of two brothers. I've been working with the one for 11 years. He was the victim of most of the sexual abuse that occurred. The teams kept these two apart for many, 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 many years. They're now in their 40s. There was agreement for them to start seeing each other because they wanted to several years ago, and we did that very slow and methodically. And they're just two very different people. They're at two very different places. And the one that I work with in particular has a history of severe physical aggression and property destruction. And we had to go there. And he has really limited communication skills, but we had to go there in terms of what it was like for him and what happened with each family member to give him some control, to give him some power, to give him a voice. I had him even just pretend that something was his father. And I said, just say or yell or do whatever you want to him. And he was just F you, like he was screaming, F you. Fast forward a little bit. I saw him yesterday and I said, your brother is wanting to see you. He's asking about you. And of course, and I think this is where forced compliance comes in. Okay, yeah, that'd be good. The caregiver, who's a life sharing provider, called me on the way home and said he started to cry in the car. That's interesting. He's not a crier at all. He felt really sad. And then he said, I don't want to see my brother. And I said, good for you. That's really an important thing. Thank you for
yeah.
telling me. And I said, the old person would have hit her on the way home. He would have torn up the house afterwards, but it's coming out.
And it's so difficult because so many of the direct support professionals are really dedicated, wonderful people. They're not doing it for the money. They're doing it for the most part. They're doing it because they care. They care about these people. But it's asking a lot of them. And I don't think they get enough support. They don't. When I do a training for an agency, I mean, you can just see it. Like they so want the information, but the direct support professionals, I have such a huge job. They're so important in this. I think they're the most next to the person. I think they're the most important piece in this whole journey. that we're in.
And people are burning out. I mean, just
They are.
left and right, because we're supporting people with some really challenging backgrounds. I mean,
Yep.
it's no longer the days of here's this cute little person with Down syndrome that we need to go in there and support. It is, I mean, just scathing histories of
Yep.
abuse and neglect and trauma, and decades of teams saying, oh, we can't talk about it because if you
Exactly.
talk about the problem, it's going to make it worse. Well, if you don't talk about the problem, it's going to get worse. And
That's right.
it may temporarily get worse by talking about it, but then it gets much better. So we do
Yeah.
have to go there.
It's a journey, isn't it?
Whereas so hard, because the work that we do, there's just so much information too.
Yeah.
As I shared with you, the National Sex Education Standards, K through 12, it's called the Future of Sex Education. There's a PDF that is 70 some pages long and breaks down in a grid skills and information that we should be teaching kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. It is really comprehensive.
Can you touch on some of those?
The thing that I really wanted to drill down on was K through 2, and then third grade through fifth grade. So K through 2, and I was 4 years old when I went to kindergarten, but I think the average age now is what, 5? So you're
5.
looking at between the ages of 5 and maybe 8. Here are the things, the main things that they feel kids should know. So describing the characteristics of a friend, defining body anatomy and personal boundaries. Good for them. Identify different kinds of families. So like adoptive families, same gender families, interracial families, nuclear families, the list goes on and on. They should be able to describe what different families look like. List medically accurate names for body parts, including genitalia. Define gender, gender identity, and gender role stereotypes. Discuss the range of ways people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. I have a big smile on my face. Define reproduction and explain all living things can reproduce. Define sexual abuse and identify behaviors considered child sexual abuse. Reminder, those are things recommended for kids by the age of 8.
That's extraordinary and makes absolute sense.
Looking back, because I'm going, as a parent, my kid's 18, soon to be 19. I would say he knew all of those things. And it didn't come from the school necessarily. Maybe pieces did. It came from home.
Yeah.
He loved playing with Disney princesses. He loved Disney princesses as a kid. I remember taking him to Disney, and he was getting his picture taken with all these princesses, and the Cinderella just fell in love with him. And people were like, oh my gosh, like, why are you letting him do this? He's gonna be gay. No, he's just exploring. I want my kid to be able to do things like cook his own meals and maintain his own house and do all those sorts of things that were traditional. One, so he can be self-sufficient, but two, so if he chooses to be with a woman, he doesn't treat her as a slave either.
Right.
It's a double-sided thing to look at here too.
When my 6 kids were little, we had a job chart. So we had 6 kids and Tom and myself, and we had a job chart with 8 jobs, and we all had jobs. I was in school, and then I was working, and the kids were all in school. So everybody, you'd get the meal started, set the table, clear the table, for exactly the same reasons. And doing laundry and making your bed were not on the list. You just did them. Everybody did them. And then there were the jobs. But yeah, that teaches people independence, and it's non-sexist. You didn't have the girls doing the cooking and I don't know, whatever. Everybody just rotated the jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it may sound bizarre to some people kind of reading through these, but I mean, what well-rounded young men and women we would be producing if we started doing this stuff at a younger age. Grades 3rd through 5th grade. So what's that? 8. By the time you're hitting puberty, these are the things that kids should be aware of. Describe the characteristics of healthy versus unhealthy relationships among friends and with family. Explain the relationship between consent, personal boundaries, and body autonomy, their functions and natural variations within human bodies. Because there are differences in bodies too. I read somewhere that almost 2% of the population is born intersex. So
2%.
close to 2%, was like 1.7 or 1.8%.
Wow.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah. And just the terms alone, I mean, I have people ask me frequently because they know what I do. What does pansexual mean? I mean, there are so many terms, but you and I try to keep up on them because we're right here. But the LGBTQI thing is getting really long, and we need to help people understand that. Like it's part of the living thing. It's the range of humans.
Kind of continuing here, explaining
Yeah.
the physical, social, and emotional changes that occur during puberty and adolescence, and how the onset and progression of puberty can vary. That's important because it hits at different ages. I've seen it as young as 9, where
Yep.
girls are going through and having their menstrual cycle too. But it affects mood. I hated myself through adolescence, and I hated my kid through adolescence. So we can get miserable with the mood shifts too. Describe how puberty prepares human bodies for the potential to reproduce, and how some healthy people have conditions that impact the ability to produce. I thought that was
Oh, that's very interesting.
explain common human sexual development and the role of hormones. So that's more like explaining romantic feelings, masturbation, mood swings, puberty
Yeah.
onset. They should be aware of those things too. Describe the role hormones play in physical, social, cognitive, and emotional changes during adolescence, and the potential role of hormone blockers on young people who identify as transgender. Now, there's a huge controversy in this country. Every day I'm seeing a bill to ban this or a bill to
I
ban that,
know.
whether it's abortion or it is adolescent medicine to support puberty blockers. And my counter response to that is, if you're going to tell me you're okay with children killing themselves, which
It's right.
50%,
Yep.
then I'll listen to what you have to say. So you have to tell me that you're okay with kids killing themselves. Until then,
Yep.
we got to pay attention to this stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. Boy, that's hit home.
So
Yeah.
the list continues. Distinguish between sex assigned at birth and gender identity, and explain how they may or may not differ. Continues. Define and explain differences between cisgender, transgender, gender expansive, and gender identity.
Wow.
This is at around the age of 9 or 10. Kids should know these things
Yeah.
because they want to know more about this stuff before puberty does hit, because
Yeah.
that's where it gets really hard for kids who identify differently than with what they were born with between the legs. Explain gender expression and gender identity and how it exists along a spectrum. Describe gender roles and stereotypes and their potential impact on oneself and others. Define sexual orientation. Differentiate sexual orientation and gender identity. Hell, the neurotypical population of adults don't seem to understand the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity.
I know.
Explain the relationship between sexual intercourse and human reproduction. We were kind of talking a little bit about that too. Explain the range of ways pregnancy can occur, because people still think the pull-out method is effective too, right? Define STDs, including HIV, and clarify common myths about transmission. We've talked about that in the past, and STDs or STIs, it's becoming more and more of a problem. So clearly, people aren't receiving the information, or they're not
Right.
understanding it.
A young woman that I knew, she had said she couldn't have an STI because she didn't have sex. And the doctors asked her if she had oral sex. And she said, well, yes, but I didn't have sex. And she had a sexually transmitted infection through oral sex,
Yeah.
but she just thought, no, I've never had sex.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they're saying there. Just explain all of that.
And when I was looking further at information people need as they're getting older, understanding that there are medical components to support for STIs, like the vaccines. I remember
Yeah.
getting like talking with Jack about that and having him choose, and he did choose to get the vaccines for
The human
HPV.
papilloma. Yeah.
Yes. And I thought, good for him, but I allowed it to be his choice in talking about that kind of stuff too. So there's one more here. Define sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and domestic violence, and explain why they are harmful in their potential impacts too. That's as a child. They need to.
Yeah. I love that list. I had no idea that that existed. I'm so glad that you found that. Don't want to keep repeating how old I am, but I mean at 80, for God's sakes. I mean, it's just I had there was nothing at all, nothing. And if you asked a question, I mean, nobody would answer you. Oh, don't worry about it, honey. And when I think about the LGBTQI stuff, all of it, then there's so much, and I feel very much part of that community. But when I was a kid, there were two words and they were both bad. And one's been reclaimed by the community, the queer, but I don't like it because of what it meant. And the other is, well, I don't even like to say it. It's like the N word, but the F word.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean they were the only two words. And I mean, there were lots of, gay, lesbian, transgender people around, but they didn't even know because there weren't words that they didn't know who they were or why things were happening. Oh, I'm so thrilled with that list. I feel like writing a letter saying thank you for whoever put that together. And it goes all the way up through high school, right?
For high school, yes.
Through high school.
So I think looking at resources like this, and that's where the sexual consent screenings that we do, it identifies areas where a person may need more education, and that's where we need to really focus on creating the resources and providing people with the education so that they are more successful in their lives. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Two Old Sexperts. We hope you'll join us for the next episode coming soon.